We are almost 4 years out from the release of Ghost Recon Breakpoint, and the question we should all be asking ourselves is, what has Ubisoft Paris learned? We've discussed AI teammates and an update to their controls, enemy AI, gear management systems, gore, camouflage systems, magazines versus weapon pools, suppressors. Everything under the sun has been discussed, but there is a game mechanic that I feel might go overlooked and has not been discussed enough, and it needs to be discussed more because we cannot go another game without a complete overhaul of ballistics in the Ghost Recon franchise. Bullets need to travel farther and more realistically. Bullets should have a more realistic bullet drop. Weather, wind should dictate bullet traversal. Ubisoft Paris does a great job at creating amazing looking weather, but there's no actual mechanic behind the wind when putting a shot down range. We should get to a place where weather mechanics matter when shooting. What's the point of all these scopes if bullets just travel straight? Sure, there's some bullet drop, but that's the only thing we have to account for when shooting. Will we ever get a system where we have to determine windage and adjust for it on our scopes? We need to discuss the engagement distances within this franchise. Enemy engagements should be able to happen at farther distances, making Ghost Recon feel more like a true tactical shooter. In case you didn't know, the cutoff for the enemy assault type in Ghost Recon Breakpoint is 135 meters. That's it. Past that, the enemies will no longer shoot at the player and will instead begin to run and attempt to get within that 135 meter range to start shooting again. We've been speaking about these mechanics long before Vandar created Spartan Realism mod. But that mod proved without a shadow of a doubt that this franchise can do more and should do more within the combat space. This is even outside of the rendering issues that the game has at far distances. Spartan Realism mod allows 200 to 400 meter engagements and it's not outlandish or broken. Sure, foliage and vegetation issues pop their heads up when enemies might spot you through foliage at far distances, but the mod showcases that Ubisoft doesn't have to focus this game purely around CQC stealth kills. It doesn't have to focus on only CQB compound hopping. We should be setting up our AI teammates, or if we're working with co-op teammates, to engage enemies out in the world at 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 plus meters. Enemy snipers should see you from so far out that the encroachment of a base should be dealt with so carefully that actual recon in the game matters. There should be layers of engagement at various ranges in this franchise. Ghost Recon needs to get to a place where combat and firefights aren't always stuck within this 135 meter range. Now, I know due to technical issues, especially with last gen hardware, Ghost Recon and open world games are designed with rendering issues in mind. And due to that, I assume the combat we see and the gameplay they create is somewhat created around that. You can't have firefights at extreme distances if the game has rendering issues at those distances, as far as enemies in the open world. Ghost Recon Breakpoint took a step in the right direction and started spawning enemy patrols and squads outside of compounds, which was a huge improvement in my opinion, because it brought some much needed life to the game outside of the combat in compound game loop. However, even if Ubisoft creates a new Ghost Recon and chooses to utilize the same design techniques, Spartan Realism mod has proved to us that we have more options within the difficulty settings compared to what we have now. So, enemies don't have to be so blind and dumb, and the game can still feel balanced and difficult for those higher difficulty settings. I'm even willing to go as far as saying, hey, add the Spartan mod parameters. Let us tweak them in difficulty settings. Put a disclaimer stating that some of these difficulty settings and in-game mechanics are not intended for all audiences, as they may be too difficult. Players are to change them at their own discretion. At least with that, the casual gamer would understand, hey, these settings will make the gameplay too difficult for me, I'm gonna avoid messing with them. More hardcore audiences could then still have difficult and engaging gunfights and not worry about if it affects the casual player and what they experience. Think of it as putting these Spartan mod parameters behind a UI screen that says, hey, this is for the most hardcore of players. Let's be completely honest. Spartan mod parameters do not make the game all that crazy or broken. It makes it fun, more difficult, and challenging, and that's what some of us want in our tactical shooters. We don't want deaf, dumb, and blind. We want a challenge. Now with this should come the overhaul to ballistics. Like I said before, bullets should not drop off the face of the earth so quickly and so drastically. Shooting with wind, players should have to account for it with a mechanic that allows us to gauge our shot on our reticles, countering the wind. Things like stamina can determine the handling of the weapon and weapon sway. We should have the option to load out tracers or no tracers. We should have the option to choose from subsonic and supersonic rounds. And with that, various in-game mechanics can be brought to life. There can be a balance. It doesn't have to go too crazy though. I know some gun nuts might want different bullet grains and complete realism, but we can still maintain a balance of realism and game mechanics. But the overall idea of improving the ballistics must be discussed thoroughly. We cannot have another iteration in this franchise where the shooting of these weapons feels like paintball guns or pellet guns. Suppressors don't always need to be as quiet as a fart. It's okay to penalize players for taking out a 50 cal sniper rifle. Yes, they can be heard with a suppressor on the weapon. It's okay for bases to go on yellow alert more often when shooting assault rifles with suppressors on them in the middle of a base. We then need to move into redesigning enemy AI around this and the new ballistic system. As per Spartan Realism mod, it already works in Breakpoint with enemies going on yellow alert. More enemies do go on yellow alert when shooting a suppressed weapon with the mod on. Players should be thinking about their loadouts and what type of bullet they are matching to the weapon and whether or not it's suppressed, unsuppressed, and what that means for the ballistics when they shoot. We've gotten too comfortable with this arcade system of shooting, allowing players to pick up any weapon, be as quiet as a mouse, and do whatever they want with whatever weapon. It's time to reimagine what it means to be a ghost and reimagine what it means to play Ghost Recon. Creating an actual loadout for your ghost should be a vital mechanic in this game. Your decision here should matter tremendously. The enemy should be smart, lethal, and should take you out if you're walking around the middle of the day right in front of them at 100 or 200 meters. This is the discussion for hardcore players, but I think more players lean towards the hardcore audience in this space than not. I'm not saying that this can't be tweaked for the casual audience. What I'm saying is allow what we've experienced with the Spartan Realism mod to be an option for players within the difficulty settings to make this game the game that more hardcore audiences want. Then add the ballistic system on top of that, and now you have a AAA tactical shooter that doesn't exist anywhere else among the PC and console consumer market. I believe if Ubisoft Paris could, and rendering allowed it, they need to extend the shooting and gunplay in the game well beyond 135 meters. Again, this is for the assault rifle archetype I'm using as an example. Snipers range out to 300 plus in the game, but snipers should be seeing you at 4, 5, 6, 700 meters. And yes, this means the design of the game has to also change. You have to be able to encroach on a certain base from 1,000 meters out. This leads into discussions about how players deck their characters out. A base with snipers that can hit you from a distance, and you might not want to attack that base with a bunch of players all carrying Mark 18s. So, yeah, allow enemies to see the player at extreme distances depending on difficulty switches like the changing of parameters in Spartan Realism mod. Allow the enemy assault rifle class and snipers and others to engage at far distances, and the game will then have the best of both worlds within this tactical shooter space. Getting close for the kill would actually feel rewarding because enemy AI is deadly. Getting in firefights at 200, 300, 400 meters would bring a whole new level of combat to the franchise, as so many people are used to this up-close CQB game loop that doesn't really challenge them. And trust me, it's not going to be hard to market this, especially with the direction Ubisoft took with Ghost Recon Breakpoint. The people in this space playing these types of games are yearning for a realistic shooter and a great Ghost Recon game. It just has to be done right. I feel like these mechanics might be ignored for other pressing issues, but in my opinion, These are some of the main mechanics that matter most. Ghost Recon is to be the game that revolves around combat, not one that revolves around the cliche video game tropes of acquiring loot and decking your character out with the most high-level gear you found in the latest raid. Now granted, that's an entirely different conversation when it comes to an endgame loop that keeps the carrot on the stick going for the player base, but we're not getting into that right now. Right now, we're trying to drill into the minds of this community that what you've experienced the past 2 games with the open world of Ghost Recon is only the testing stage of what's to come, and what should come, in my opinion, is a game in which open world combat and CQB compound combat are at the opposite ends of the game loop combat spectrum, and the player is to engage in all of these types of various combat situations throughout their time playing. The days of only compound hopping and being 50 meters away from enemies who can't see you needs to go away and be done with forever. The days of not thinking about the type of loadout you want when it comes to the mission, the ballistics, the distance, the type of engagements needs to end. The days of treating the Ghost Recon franchise as a casual arcade shooter needs to end. Ghost Recon, in my opinion, needs to once again become the squad-based tactical shooter it's meant to be, and the mechanics to be created for this franchise need to represent that. And that, my friends, is what I'm hoping for, and I'm hoping that's the future of this IP.